Okay, now we're going to go to Los Angeles. Here we go.
Hi, Mr. Bernanke. I'm Diane Larson, and I teach economics, and business law at Modern Day High School, Santa Ana, California. And I have this question for you. What do you believe is the best way to anticipate and prevent another financial crisis similar to the one that started in 2008? Thank you.
How to anticipate and prevent a financial crisis. Another easy question. Well, obviously, given the cost of the last financial crisis, we'd like to do all we can to anticipate and prevent if another financial crisis, and if one happens, to mitigate its effects as much as possible. I would say, broadly speaking, that the new regulatory structures, both the Dodd-Frank Act, the Basel Accord, and other parts, is really a two-part strategy, if I might. The first is that we are now taking, when I say we, I mean the financial regulators, the government in general, are now taking a sort of a more systemic approach. That is, before the crisis, every regulator had its own particular institution, particular market that it was responsible for, and nobody was there watching the system as a whole. The idea that, in fact, that regulators ought to work together to identify risks in the broader system, which is called macroprudential regulation, was discussed even before the crisis, but it is now, I think, part of what the new regulatory structure is trying to accomplish. So we have, for example, something called the Financial Stability Oversight Council, known lovingly around here as FSOC, which consists of 10 major regulators, including the Federal Reserve, as well as some other regulators who don't have votes, including state and local state regulators. The FSOC's job is to look at the system as a whole, to try to identify problems, to see if there are risks that may threaten the system. Are there weaknesses in the structure of the system? Are there gaps in regulation that need to be addressed? The Federal Reserve has its own Office of Financial Stability, which we created since the crisis, which has a similar function, again, to try to monitor the whole system, to try to identify problems that might be arising. And we work closely with the FSOC to look for new problems, to try to see where there might be the next crisis might be coming from, and to take steps to at least to provide a warning so that we can collectively address those problems. So that's the first part, which is to have a macroprudential approach, which is looking at the system as a whole, is trying to identify gaps and weaknesses and fix those if possible. Now, we know perfectly well that we won't be able to identify every problem that comes along. The issues are very complex, and historically, it just happens that, very often that neither the private sector nor the public sector identifies a problem until it's already upon us. So the second part of the strategy is to make the system itself as resilient as possible. So whatever happens, even if we don't identify it or prevent it, the system will be stronger and able to survive and continue to provide credit even in the face of a shock. So there are many aspects of that. One example would be the new capital standards that have been agreed upon by not just the United States, but essentially all the major countries in the world, so-called Basel III capital standards. What they would do is increase the amount of reserves, capital, that banks have very substantially. And that means is that when banks, whatever may happen, if banks take significant losses relative to where they were before the last crisis, they'll have lots of capital which can absorb those losses and prevent those losses from turning into a failure or to a broader banking panic. So greater capital, stronger rules on derivatives trading, more liquidity for banks so they have enough cash on hand to meet withdrawals, all of those things are intended to make the system stronger, so no matter what may happen, and there's certainly going to be something we don't anticipate, the system will be better prepared to absorb the shock without going into crisis as we saw in 2008.